My guest today is author Sallie H. Weissinger. In today's episode, she and I talk about her memoir, Yes Again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker, that recounts her life as a late-in-life widow and the highs and lows of navigating the tricky online dating world of the 2000s. Interwoven throughout her adventures in search of a new relationship are stories from her childhood as a military brat, her Southern heritage, her various marriages, and the volunteer work in Central and South America that helped her keep moving forward through it all. Yes Again shows us that good things happen when we open up our minds and hearts. Welcome to Lifeology, Sallie.
Oh, thank you so much. This is very special for me.
I am looking forward to this. We had a wonderful call and the pre-call, a wonderful talk rather, and I found out that you are in Portland, Oregon, and I used to live there as well. And so it's kind of neat to talk to a fellow Portlander. It's as you know, if they always talk about the sunscreen or the sun lotion is like WD-40 because everywhere has so much rain there. It's so silly.
And some kind of mold removal stuff because of all the drizzle.
Exactly. But it is a beautiful, beautiful area. Yeah. Now, you have done so many things in your life. When I was reading all the information, I mean, you teach Spanish, you do so much. You give back in a lot of ways. Is that pretty much your normal disposition throughout your life? Was to do that?
Well, in my 20s, when I was living in New Orleans, which is my hometown, I taught high school Spanish and college Spanish. But then after a divorce, my first marriage, I brought my very young child to the Bay Area and moved away from Spanish except for going to Spanish movies and reading Spanish novels. So when I retired, I went back to my love of Spanish, and that was when I started doing medical interpreting in Central and South America.
Wow, that's amazing. That is really special.
It was, at that point I had lost the very important people in my life, and I thought, now what can I do to make my life of value? And I started getting involved in medical interpreting, and it just opened up a whole new world for me. I loved it. I still love it. COVID has messed with that, but I will go back to it.
Yes, you will. Let's transition into your book, Yes Again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker. What was your desire or what was the reason for writing this memoir?
Well, initially, I didn't plan to write a memoir. When my husband died, and I met him through the old-fashioned newspaper personals, and part of my book talks about that. But I was 34 years old, and I was in San Francisco, and it was a little racy to do that. But I just wasn't meeting people. So when he died, and we were together for 24 years, I just poured my heart and soul out on my computer. It was not intended to be a memoir. And then a few years after maybe a year and a half after he died, I said, well, I met this wonderful man through the personals. I'm going to do it again. But by then I was pushing 60, and everything was online. And it was a whole different world. And when I told my girlfriends some of what I was doing, they said, Sallie, you need to write a book. And that's the misadventures part. There were lots of misadventures. I was never scared. I was never unsafe. Sure. But there were some unpalatable things, like people trying to extort money from me or Googling a man who had a criminal past. And when I told him about it, he said, gee, is that a deal breaker for you? And I said, yes. The fact that you have 2 convictions is a deal breaker.
Yeah, that would be a deal breaker. Yes. So we're going to raise that bar a little higher. So moving forward.
We're not having a second date with you. No.
That is hysterical. We were talking about other losses that you've had, and obviously I want to respect your past and everything you've experienced, but you have experienced a lot of loss before, and many people have, but yours, there's a lot of loss right at one after the other. When you experienced that loss, I can't imagine how that was in the sense of your life probably felt like it was over. Many areas of your life, things were taken away from you. How did you find your ability to crawl your way out of that pit of despair?
Well, I would like to say that I never faltered, but that's not true. There were times that I was barely scraping my way out of a black hole. But my father was a military officer. My mother was kind of a Lucille Ball, anti-MAME person who always looked on the bright side of things. And we'd moved a lot. I went to 11 different schools, 3 high schools. And each time, it was hard in the beginning, but then I made friends. And it was hard again, and I made friends. And I just knew that I just had to keep going. But it wasn't a straight path. There were zigzags. And I have a lot of energy. My friends always say, do you ever take a nap? And the answer is no.
I get that too.
But I sure did a lot of crying. And I used to walk the streets at night, up and down in Berkeley, where I've lived most of my life, and say, you've got to get out of this. You've got to knock this. You've got to win this one. And when my only child died, I went into serious grief counseling. So at that point, I said, I don't know if I can really get over this. But with volunteer work and with going back to Spanish, and I mean, if you go to Nicaragua and El Salvador, and you spend more on a latte than a family of 4 spends for lunch, you know you don't have it so bad.
Yeah. Perspective. Definitely perspective is a thing that I think many of us, we get. And that's the great thing about a memoir is it's different from an autobiography, because autobiography just goes through linear aspects of one's life, but where a memoir gives a retrospective. In other words, on the other side of things, you can say, what did I learn? What was happening for me at this time? What was my motivation? What was my reason behind that? I think that's one of the beautiful things about a memoir. So that's, for you were able to get that perspective, giving back and realizing your life, as painful as it was, there are other people as well who could probably use your help as well. And as you give back, you're also healing yourself.
Well, there's a whole school of thought about altruism that says the person being altruistic is also selfish in a way because they're getting something by giving something. And boy, oh boy, oh boy. I mean, I volunteered at dog shelters because I adore rescue dogs. I volunteered with medical interpreting, I walked a service dog for a quadriplegic, and every single time I did those things, I felt personally better. I felt rewarded. And I mean, do things for a quadriplegic, it's really hard to feel sorry for yourself.
Yes. In psychology, we teach that whatever you perceive to be true, in other words, what you think about determines what you feel. What you feel determines how your body responds or how you behaviorally respond. So the way it responds can be the way that the chemistry in your brain changes, or just you respond in a way that you're either angry with someone, so you yell at them. And so that's kind of how it works. But with what you're saying here, I remember in my doctoral program, we were talking about altruism, and there was a big discussion of exactly what you said. Is it benevolent, or is it altruistic, or is it selfish? And my response was, does it really matter? I mean, the world's getting better, so why are we even discussing this? I don't know.
I was just going to say, it doesn't matter because everybody wins. It's a win for the person that's being helped. It's a win for you helping because you're getting helped. And there was one other thing. I hadn't thought of this until you started talking. One of the things, and I've kind of lost this insight, after my husband died, and again, after my parents died, and my daughter died, all within 4 years, I said, this really puts in perspective what matters. I am no longer going to be worried when I get a bill that I think I've already paid and I find out there's a penalty. I'm no longer going to worry about being stuck in a traffic jam. I am not going to worry when I run out of milk. That doesn't matter. And I told myself, don't ever get caught up in the small stuff. Keep a perspective. And for a while I did. But traffic jams bother me now. And I don't like running out of milk.
But in the grand scheme of things, you get it. I wanted to go back to the altruistic thing. So what I was sharing earlier about what you think determines what you feel, determines how you respond. The way it works with altruism is when you think about helping someone, and you think about helping someone, you have this feeling of gratitude or benevolence. I want to help them. And then when you do respond to them and you do something for them, all of a sudden what happens is your body rewards you with dopamine. So dopamine is one of those really feel-good chemicals. It helps you it helps you stay focused. It gives you motivation. It gives you drive, and you feel good about it. So the reward that you were getting, or anybody who does something altruistic, is your body rewards you with dopamine once you give back to someone. That's why if you do something for, a stranger on the street, if you give a homeless person money or whatever it might be, and all of a sudden you just feel so good. You're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. What's really cool though, and this is how you'll know if you're being altruistic or not, because if you do something for someone and you don't have that hit of dopamine, then that means you actually were being selfish in the reason why you're doing it, because you want it to look good or appear good to the world. But that is your reward, is just what people think about you. And you're actually don't get the hit of dopamine because your intention was not there. So that's how you'll know for yourself if you're really being altruistic, was because you got that hit of dopamine, that excitement, that, oh my gosh, my life just feels so good. So that's, as my listeners and viewers right now, as you do something, you'll know what your motivation was, because you can't hide from yourself. You'll know if you do something, if you have that reward, if the reward center in your brain rewards you, or if it doesn't. So if it doesn't, then you might want to look at why you were doing what you were doing. But that's just a little nugget for you to think about as well.
Okay, but I love this. So if I do, somewhere my subconscious knows that I'm just trying to do this to make myself look good, maybe to, put myself in a position of getting a promotion or getting somebody to admire me, and I don't get the dopamine hit.
Yes, correct. Because your motivation was not actually benevolent. It wasn't pure. It wasn't altruistic. And that's the difference. So it may look the same to the world, but you'll know for yourself what your motivation was. And the more information you have about that will determine how you can move your life in a different direction. Because if you're like, oh, I want to do this for someone and I don't get that reward, then we have to really look at, well, then why am I doing this? And for some people, that's fine. But if we really want to use some of the techniques you're talking about giving back, that's how you're healing yourself. Because when we are in the fight or flight effect, we have all the cortisol in our body and all the norepinephrine and all these other chemicals. And so the more of that we have, the fight or flight, then it causes us our body breaks down. We don't metabolize well. We can't sleep well. And just all the stress, our hypertension. So when we do these things that you're talking about, we focus on how can I give back. Giving back reduces all the cortisol. It gives you the dopamine. And what they've also found when it comes to research, that the people who do altruistic things for others, it gives them more energy because of the dopamine, which then causes them to exercise more and laugh more. And then they exercise and laugh more, they actually live longer lives. And so it's a huge chain of events. So when you give back to others, you're actually not only rewarding yourself, but you will actually be able to live a little bit longer as well, which is pretty amazing.
Well, this really is helpful, and it reduces guilt for me, because I sometimes thought, why are you doing this? Is it just for you? But I had the hit. And I know what you mean. I'm not perfect. And there were times that I did things, to kind of make myself look good, not more at work. And it was self-serving. Anyway, that's cool.
That is really neat. Yeah. So I always love teaching these little nuggets like that, because it just gives people insight into why we do what we do and what's the motivation. Because once you understand the motivation, it allows you to either continue with that behavior if you feel it's healthy for you, or you can interrupt it and do something different. So remember, whatever you think about determines what you feel, determines how your body responds. And that's something in every single event. Like we're talking now, you're thinking about something, you feel something, you respond to me in a certain way. So it's a chain of command or chain of events, how it is for every single person when we interact or just when we simply think. So let's transition into your book again. So I want to talk more about this. So yes, again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker. Of course, today I'm speaking with Sallie H. Weissinger. Tell me more about it. So I know it's interwoven with a lot of your backstory when you were younger. Where does it start? What's the opening scene?
Well, I love my opening scene. This is the only book I've ever written, so I know the opening scene is incredibly important, and I feel lucky that I came upon it without the skill or the talent to think this through. But I had moved to San Francisco with my 3-year-old daughter. I wasn't getting any child support, and I was having really low-level jobs. I couldn't get a teaching job, and I didn't have any time to meet anyone. And about 5 years after I'd been here, I was 34, and I did the Bay Guardian newspaper personals. And I looked at all of the I looked at all of the way women describe themselves as sexy and curvaceous and sensual and experienced in techniques. So I wrote a very boring thing that said sensitive, intelligent woman, slender. I didn't say pretty. I didn't say beautiful. I didn't say sexy. And seeks male counterpart, somebody strong, gentle, intelligent, good sense of humor. That was it. And I put it in the newspaper for 2 weeks. And it cost about $45. I was really trying to keep the price down. This would have been in 1978. So I got 60 responses, and I met 12 yeses, and I put 8 maybes, and then 40 nos. I mean, I got letters from an older man who wanted a younger woman, a younger man who wanted an older, experienced woman, people who wanted threesomes, and 2 prisoners at San Quentin who wanted me to visit them on weekends. And there was one maybe.
Very diverse.
Yeah, visit them on weekends. So obviously they were no's.
Yes.
But there was one person in the maybe pile who had put a picture of his dog in his envelope. And he said, if you don't want to meet me, would you send me my photograph back? And he included a self-addressed stamped envelope. And I love dogs. They mean all the world to me. I was going to return it. But too much time went on. The postal rates changed. I kept meaning to go get a whole bunch of 2-cent stamps. And I just said, I'll meet this guy. Well, oh my gosh. We met at the ice cream store near my house, and I fell in love. And if it hadn't been for a 2-cent postal rate increase, I would not have had those 24 years. So that's how the book starts.
That's amazing.
I could never understand why I put him in the maybe pile. His letter came across as glib and kind of self-conscious and kind of strutting his stuff. And he spent the rest of our time together saying, why did you put me in the maybe pile? Nobody ever put me in the maybe pile. And I said, thank God the postal rates changed.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting because sometimes we don't understand in the moment, things don't make sense. But, every event in our life is like a jigsaw puzzle piece. So you moved to San Francisco or the Bay Area. You had that happen, and then you were in the postals, and then you had all these other opportunities, and then the 2-cent stamp, and so all these little things you can break them down into micro units, if you will, or really small jigsaw puzzle pieces. Yeah, exactly.
The photograph of the dog. I mean, the photograph of the dog. If he'd had another copy of the photograph, I wouldn't have had to send it back. But one of the other most wonderful things that happened is that he was in a men's group. And they met every Monday night, and there were 8 people in the men's group, 7 people plus himself. And he said to his men's group, I've met this really nice woman from Louisiana. And one of the other men said, Sallie Weissinger. So people in his men's group, one person in his men's group knew me.
Really?
I just found that amazing.
That is amazing. And I think that's a thing, when we look at, like I said, when it comes to all the different events, the events that you didn't want to go through in life that you would never want to go through again, but they link together to be able to talk today and be able to share your book. Once again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker, because I know so many people when they do read this book or have already read it, because I was reading the reviews as well, how life-changing it is for so many people. So I think that's another lesson for all of us is that regardless of where we are in life, you wait a little bit longer, you'll find some perspective, and you'll realize how this one event links to another event, which linked to another event, and then it all doesn't necessarily mean it makes sense, but there's a purpose and a plan that comes out of it. And that's the important part, because when you can look for that, you'll find it.
Now, remind me of that. It's not a saying, it's a concept that you drop a stone in a pond or in a stream and the ripples, ripples affect other ripples, other ripples. That's exactly what you're saying reminds me of. Exactly.
And so it also is like the chaos theory, which they talk about. It's the theory that basically says a butterfly can flap its wings on one side of the world and all of a sudden there's a tsunami on the other side of the world. And so that's the same concept as far as everything is interconnected and everything's interwoven together in some way. And that's also the great thing as well is like when you think about this, like I just have a chance to talk with you today, having so much fun. And so when we're done with this, I'm sure I'm going to talk to my mom about this, and she's like, "Oh, I can't wait to read this book." It's going to be it's interesting. All of that ripple effect. In fact, just a little personal, my father passed away in 2010. So my mother's also a widow. So as a child, being able to go through that with her and to experience that, as someone has experienced loss before. And so that's why, when I read your information, I was like, oh my gosh, I would really, like to speak more with you, because loss, as we all know, whether it's a spouse or not, loss is so painful. And so, but through that, there's always hope. And to hear your story of how you hope.
How old is your mother, and how is she doing?
Thank you for asking. She is 73 now. 73. She's doing well. So it's been 12, as the time of this recording, almost 13 years since he's passed. So she's doing phenomenal. She's really involved in her church, and she gives it back to a lot of widows, and she talks to them, and she really helps them and helps them recognize that where you're at today, as painful as it is, with perspective, with time, that grief can still be there, but you still have a purpose, and you have to find your purpose. And so when you find your purpose, that's when you're able to give back to other people as well.
Well, it's interesting. Just yesterday or the day before, I listened to a TED Talk by, I forget what her first name is, but her last name is McInerney or McInerney. Okay. And she talks about you don't get over grief, you move through it. And I have a dear friend who just lost her husband, and I told her, I sent it on to her, and I said, don't watch this unless you can afford a box of Kleenex and some time to recover. But, the woman has found another husband, but that doesn't mean you don't have the feelings you had. Yes. But it gets better, and you move on, but you don't give it up.
Correct. Because if we compare what was to what is today, it's never going to be the same. What was always perfect, because that's what we always wanted. But so when you compare what was to what is today, they're never going to match. And so that's why you have to say they're different. I always tell people it's important to compartmentalize the event. So if, let's say, the event happened, for us, it was in January of 2010, every January of that year or the next year, if you memorialize the event and you memorialize the death, then what happens is it triggers you back to the initial grief that you experienced, which then feels like it sets you back. And so every time you experience something, or every time a day goes by or an anniversary date goes by, you think, well, what's really different between this date versus yesterday? Because if you assign a date or assign pain and emotion to a certain date, you re-traumatize yourself to the time of the event. So that's why it's important to experience the grief all the time. But if you do mark it with a certain date, then unfortunately that will cause more pain and be harder for someone to move on and, quote, accept today, because they still keep triggering themselves back to the initial grief.
So I have a question about re-traumatizing. Last week would have been my daughter's 51st birthday. She died when she was 35. Her birthday still packs a wallop in my stomach.
I'm sure it does.
How do you not re-traumatize? I mean, are you saying you should do something to not? I mean, most of the year I'm just fine, but her birthday is a kick in the pants.
And thank you for sharing that. I'm so sorry that you told me a little bit before what happened, and my heart goes out to you. When it comes to the trauma as well, it's if a person celebrates the date, like for example the birthday, there's nothing wrong with doing that. But if you know it's going to cause you so much grief, how can you spread that out? So every day is a celebration of her life. Every day is a version of her memory. So when you do that and spread it out over a period of time, it doesn't pack as big of a wallop as it would have, because you're able to, like I said, make it so it's not so powerful, all condensed emotions into one time. So my suggestion, and just a suggestion, people can do whatever is healthy for them, is, is to be mindful of that. So if you know the time's coming up, what can you do to spread out that grief? So let's say you do it for a month, a celebration of her for a month. What does that look like? And so when you're able to have small little things with her, or thoughts about her, journal about her, etc., that then allows for the grief not to feel so condensed, and it's a little more diluted throughout the year.
I would say over the years, because it's been 16, the grief has gotten diluted. Not the first few years, but it's definitely better, less intense, but I'm not sure I want to spread it out over a month. I know it's coming. Yeah. But it doesn't immobilize me. I'd like to say something about an experience. This is actually chapter 12 of my book, which might be my favorite chapter in the book. And I named all the chapters after songs. And this song is called Bridge Over Troubled Water, which was the Simon and Garfunkel with the Peruvian music. About 5 years ago, I can't remember the exact year, I didn't have a medical interpreting trip. So a girlfriend asked me to go to Peru. And I felt guilty because I was just taking a fun trip to a South American country without, contributing. And we went to the Sacred Valley of Cusco, and we had a man who was an anthropologist, Western or educated, but he was also a shaman, and he was a guide, and he took us on hikes every day. And then one night he had, I would have said it was a seance. It was just quiet, dark, about 7 of us were there. And I had been speaking Spanish with everybody around, but never with him. And he called me to come be with him. And he started talking to me in Spanish. And I didn't know he knew I spoke Spanish. And he said, "Why are you walking around held in, quiet? What's painful to you?" And I said, after I said, "Gee, I didn't know I came across that way," because I was cheerful, I thought.
Sure, of course.
But he said something. And I said, "Because I don't think I'll ever love anyone the way I loved my husband and my daughter." And he asked me a bunch of questions, and I answered them, how they died, when they died, how I felt, how I had celebrated them. And I said, "Well, I don't know how I celebrated them." And he gave me instructions to wash my face with some kind of herbs when I got back to the States, and make a tea of some kind of herbs when I got back to the States. And he provided those herbs. And he said, "On this date, I want you to burn red candles for each of them with a photo of each of them." So I had a picture of my beautiful daughter in her Apache helicopter. She had gorgeous red hair, and she had her helmet on, and she could have been a Victoria's Secret model. And then I had a picture of my husband and me. And I burned a red candle, and he said that was for the passion that I felt for them. And he said, "Don't blow them out." And the next morning, and I'm not woo-woo, but the next morning the candles were still burning, and I didn't want them ever to burn out. I just felt this surge of passion. Now, the second, 3 days later, I was supposed to burn golden candles. And they had to be beeswax next to the same pictures. And he said, "You need to illuminate their path, and their path is different from your path. You need to illuminate their path so they can be where they are." And again, I went to sleep with the candles on, and the next morning they were almost gone, and it was wonderful to wake up and see these candles. And then the third day, a few days later, I was to burn green candles for regrowth, renaissance, rebirth, to take me on my path. And, when I first did it, I said, well, of course I'll do it, but it really, really made me focus on passion, on illuminating a path, on rebirth. And my friends all said, "You seem so relaxed. What happened?" And, it was fabulous.
That's fantastic. I love that. Well, and with that, unfortunately, we're going to have to close up right here. But I've had such a fantastic time having you on my show today, Sallie. If my listeners want to find out more information about you and to purchase this book, because you just told us so many things that I know are intriguing to many people, but if they can find this book, where would they find this book, rather? Yes, again, Misadventures of a Wishful Thinker. Where would we be able to find this or purchase this?
Okay, well, I have an author page, Sallie Weissinger Facebook author page. I also have a website that says yesagainmemoir.com, and it gives a bunch of links where you can buy it. And the only thing I would like to say is put a plug in for your local independent bookstore or any of the stores that I have on my website.
Wonderful. Well, my listeners also know that if I cannot find this information in other place, simply go to the show notes at jamesmillerlifeology.com, and I will link you with all of Sallie's information and all the links of the bookstores or booksellers that she has. Sallie Weissinger, thank you so much for being a wonderful guest on my show.
James, this has been a pleasure. Thank you.